Origins of Southern church hats. What is a church crown? But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is the same as having her head shaved. For if a woman does not cover her head, she might as well have her hair cut off. But if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaved, then she should cover her head. 1 Corinthians 11 and 5 through 6. Church hats have become an integral part of worship attire for a cultural perspective as well, specifically within African American communities. The tradition of wearing elaborate and stylish hats to church, often referred to as Sunday best, has been passed down through generations. These hats are statements of identity, pride, and cultural heritage. They reflect the wearer's personal style while adhering to the decorum expected in a church setting. In outdoor settings, church hats serve the practical purpose of shielding from the elements. What is a milliner? The term milliner or milliner originally meant someone from Milan in northern Italy in the early 16th century. It referred to Milanese merchants who sewed fancy bonnets, gloves, jewelry, and cutlery. In the 16th to 18th centuries, the meaning of milliner gradually changed in meaning from a foreign merchant to a dealer in small articles relating to dress. Although the term originally applied to men from 1713, milliner gradually came to mean a woman who makes and sells bonnets and other accessories for women. This is a 15th century depiction of Italian composer Lorenzo de Frenzi. Where does this practice come from? The enslavement of Jews and Muslims in Iberia. Sephardic Jews were the Jewish communities of medieval Spain and Portugal, while Moriscos were Muslims who had been forced to convert to Christianity after the Christian reconquest of Iberia. During the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions, both groups faced severe religious persecution. Jews who refused conversion were expelled in 1492. Many who stayed as conversos were investigated, tortured, or executed, and some were enslaved or had their property confiscated. Moriscos similarly endured surveillance, forced assimilation, and mass expulsions beginning in 1609, with many families also enslaved, especially in the earlier centuries of conflict. Fleeing persecution, Sephardic Jews resettled across the Mediterranean in North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, the Balkans, and later Western Europe and the Americas, while Moriscos found refuge mainly in North Africa, particularly in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and America, where many rebuilt their communities and preserved elements of Iberian culture. This is a 16th century depiction of a Moor carrying wine and goat skin in Castile, Spain. Jews in Spain. And when this was done, there in public they were given their pence, which was too much to march in a procession on 6 consecutive Fridays, whipping their backs with ropes of knotted hemp, and without hose or hats, and also that they fast on those 6 Fridays. And it was ordered that as long as they should live, they could hold no public office such as mayor or constable or alderman or magistrate or notary public or gatekeeper, and that those who held such offices should lose them, and that they could not be money changers or apothecaries or spice merchants, nor could they hold any suspicious post whatsoever, nor could they wear silk or fine scarlet wool or colored clothing or gold or silver or pearls or mother of pearl or coral or any jewel, nor could they act as witnesses, nor could they rent such things. They were ordered on penalty of being considered backsliders, that is, those who fall again into the same error as before, that if they used any of those above mentioned forbidden articles, they would be condemned to be burned at the stake. And when all these ceremonies were over, they left the cathedral at 2 in the afternoon. This is a 15th century depiction titled The Miracle of the Relic of the Cross at the Point di Rialto, Venice. The distinctive occupational and residential structure of the Jews has attracted the attention of scholars of Jewish history. Abrams and Roth promoted the well-accepted view that the Jews were not engaged in farming like the rest of the population because of the restrictions and prohibitions imposed by the local rulers. Since the late Middle Ages, in many countries, Jews were prohibited from owning land, and in certain areas, they were forbidden from living in rural areas. Moreover, guilds excluded them from working in certain crafts within urban communities. Kunetz also addressed these questions. Like Reich, he established the fact that at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, the Jews in Europe and North America were not engaged in agriculture independently of the size of the agricultural sector in a given country. Furthermore, although engaged in almost all urban occupations, the Jews specialized in trade and finance. Kunetz explained this fact as the outcome of the endogenous endogenous yes decision within the economic theory of small minorities, taking the minority status as exogenous. He argued that the minority's non-economic goal of maintaining its identity made the Jewish minority specialize in certain occupations. In stating their arguments, both Roth and Kunitz were influenced by observed economic structure of the Jews in the 19th and early 20th centuries. However, the transition of Jews away from agriculture into crafts, trade, and finance occurred in the 8th century, mainly in Mesopotamia and the entire Muslim empire, and later in Western Europe, where the Jews migrated. When the occupational transition was occurring, none of the restrictions and prohibitions discussed by Abrams and Roth existed. Jews owned land but were not engaged at all in agricultural work. Narrative evidence also indicates that at this time the Jews were aware that their new urban occupations enabled them to improve their standard of living. Hence, the restrictions theory cannot account for the occupational transition. As for Kunitz's theory, notice that before the occupational transition in the first half of the millennium, the Jews were farmers and were also a minority in the lands of the Roman and Persian empires. Given that they were a minority even when they were farmers, Kunitz's theory would predict that they should stay in this occupation to preserve their group identity that had been built at that time for a farming society. Yet Jews did not remain farmers despite their minority status. This is a 14th century depiction of Gilbert de Clare, 7th Earl of Gloucester and 5th Earl of Hertford, England. Quoting from Roth, the Jew was driven by the unfortunate circumstances of his history to be predominantly a townsman. He had to seek an outlet despairingly in every branch of urban economy. Yet even here he found himself hampered at every turn by repressive legislation, whether in buying, selling, or manufacturing. Abrahams, quoting the scholar Loeb, asserted that when the medieval Jews devoted themselves largely to commerce and money lending, they were not obeying a natural taste nor a special instinct, but were led to these pursuits by the force of the circumstances, by exclusive laws, and by the express desire of kings and people. The transition of the Jews from agriculture to crafts, trade, and money lending started in the Talmudic period. Agriculture remained the main occupation of Jews in numerous countries. Yet in Palestine and Babylonia, agriculture became less and less important as a source of income and wealth for Jews after 200 CE. According to Barron, in the 5th and 6th centuries, most Jews abandoning agriculture moved into the towns and became small shopkeepers and artisans in the tanning, linen, silk, and dyeing industries and glassware making. Some Jews became wealthy traders, merchants, and moneylenders. For example, in Alexandria, Jewish traders were organized in a powerful guild that obtained privileges from the Christian emperors. It is clear that from many discussions in the Talmud that although the Jews deemed important to own land, they were aware that trade was more profitable than agriculture. The key period of urbanization occurred in Islam during the Abbasids rulers from the 8th century to the 10th century. Many cities developed and Baghdad became the main center. Urbanization in the Muslim Empire led Jews to migrate from country to country and from small villages to cities. At the end of the 8th century, the Jewish population in the Muslim regions was almost entirely urban. The movement of the Jews to the cities brought to a full-fledged stage their transition away from agriculture into urban and skilled occupation. Jews were attracted to many occupations within the cities, including handicrafts, tanning, dyeing, shipbuilding, corn and cattle dealing, book selling, and tax farming. They were also engaged in long-distance trade. In the 9th century, a Muslim writer mentioned Jewish traders who, from the southern of France, traveled to Islamic lands and went to India and China. Jews were also involved in moneylending and became bankers to the rulers. This is a 16th century depiction showing the arms of Richard de Clare II, 5th Earl of Hertford and 6th Earl of Gloucester during the 13th century. Muslim Huesca. Muslim Huesca was a city with a population of between 5,000 and 8,000 when it was conquered in 1096. After a long siege and decisive battle by the Aragonese King Pedro I, the city was pleasantly situated, surrounded by orchards and gardens, irrigated from the river Essuela that flowed nearby. It seized to the royal capital after the capture of Zaragoza in Iris, and most of its noble inhabitants sold their property in Huesca and moved. Although the city regained its status as royal capital by 1138, few nobles moved back. Huesca thus became a predominant city of merchants and artisans. However, since the district had little in the way of natural resources or raw materials and was not located on any major active trade routes, it also lost its attraction for merchants. For this reason, the artisan class, most particularly the shoemakers and butchers, became the leading citizens of the city, sharing eminence with royal officials and the personnel of the cathedral. This is a 16th century depiction detailing a portion of the King's Fountain in Lisbon, Portugal, in a painting. Muslims in Iberia. They were virtually indispensable to the nobles on whose lands they were settled, for they were the most skillful in agriculture and unwearied in labor. They carried these characteristics into every department of industry, science, and art. As physicians, they ranked with the Jews, and when in 1354 the Prior Order of Santiago built the church of Nuestra Senora de Olis, we are told that he assembled Moorish masters and good Christian stonemasons who erected the structure. They were equally skilled in marine architecture, and the Catalan power in the Mediterranean was largely due to their labors. The wonderful system of irrigation by which they converted Valencia into the Garden of Europe still exists, with its elaborate and equitable allotments of the waters. They introduced the culture of sugar, silk, cotton, rice, and many other valuable products, and not a spot of available ground was left untilled by their indefatigable labor industry. In all the mechanic arts they were unexcelled. The potteries of Malaga, the cloths of Murcia, the silks of Almeria and Granada, the leather hangings of Cordova, the weapons of Toledo were renowned everywhere, and furnished the materials for profitable foreign commerce, which was stimulated by the universal reputation of their merchants for probity and strict fidelity to their engagements, so that it passed into the proverb that the word of Granadan and the faith of a Castilian would make an old Christian, or as Hernando de Talavera, the saintly Archbishop of Granada, used to say, they ought to adopt our faith and we ought to adopt their morals. Their clothes were temperate and frugal. They married early, the girls once at 11 and the boys at 12, without fear of the future, for a bed and 10 libras or ducats were considered sufficient dowry. There were no beggars among them, for they took affectionate care of their own poor and orphans. They settled all quarrels between themselves and held it be unlawful to prosecute each other before a Christian tribunal. In short, they constituted the most desirable population that any land could possess. This is a 13th century depiction of King Alfonso III, also known as Alfonso the Great of Asturias, Leon, and Galicia, 866 to 910 AD. Muslims in Iberia. During the 800 years of the Christian advance, the Muslims who remained in the conquered territories, the Mujars, were able to preserve their faith, their places of worship, and their cemeteries. This tolerance disappeared, of course, beginning in 1502 in Castile and 1526 in Aragon, when Muslims were forced to convert to Christianity under pain of expulsion, after which they were called Moriscos. With the Christian conquest of the peninsula achieved throughout the early modern age, Spain signed many peace treaties and concluded many pacts with Muslim rulers of the Mediterranean. As a general rule of the policies of the Crown of Aragon were extended. In the eastern region, Peter Martyr of Anghiera, Pedro Martir de Anghiera to Spaniards, was sent as ambassador to the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt in 1501, in an attempt to calm his indignation at the treatment of the Moriscos in Spain. The Catalan consulate in Alexandria, in existence since the 13th century, in the early 1500s came to represent French and Neapolitan merchants also. It was recognized by the Ottomans after they conquered Egypt in 1516. Although its vice consuls were named from Barcelona as late as 1539, its effective existence probably ceased around 1528. In that year, Suleiman confirmed an earlier treaty between the Mamluk Sultan and the French, probably as a side effect of the French-Ottoman alliance forged in those years. The Catalans were placed under French protection. This is a 10th century miniature depiction of King Ramiro II of Leon, Spain, 931 to 951 AD. Types of church hats. The boater. The boater is a stiffer style of headgear with a rigid, flat brim, typically made from straw or leather. While the boater is commonly associated with summer attire, it can be suitable for all seasons. The Breton. The Breton features an upturned brim with around the entire hat and can feature a domed crown or expose the back of the head. The cloche. The cloche is a round bell-shaped hat which peaked in popularity in the 1920s and 1930s. The fascinator. Formal headpiece, a style of millinery. Since the 1990s, the term has referred to a type of formal headwear worn as an alternative to the hat. It is usually a large decorative design attached to a band or clip. The pillbox, a small hat with flat crown. It is brimless, has upright sides, and is named for its similarity to the vintage pillbox design style. The cinnamay. Cinnamay hats are lightweight and flexible. Milliners may shape and dye this hat style, which comes in various brim styles and sizes. Have you seen your grandmother wear these kind of hats? What kind of hats does she normally wear to church?